Loneliness didn't choose you. You were chosen by it. There is a reversal that changes everything. When you feel that life has isolated you, that people have drifted away, that the world keeps turning while you stand still in silence, it's almost impossible not to interpret this as abandonment, as if you've been discarded, forgotten, left behind while others thrive, laugh, connect. And in that interpretation lies a silent poison, the belief that you are the exception, the mistake, the one who didn't deserve to stay. You look around and see people building families, celebrating achievements, living lives that seem to flow with ease. And you're standing still, alone, trying to understand when life decided you didn't deserve the same. The phone doesn't ring anymore. The invitations stop coming. And each day of silence adds another layer to that devastating internal narrative. I don't matter. I don't belong. Something is fundamentally wrong with me. It's a pain that has no visible mark but weighs like concrete on your chest. An anguish that you carry alone precisely because you are alone. But what if this interpretation is completely reversed? What if loneliness is not a sign that you have been rejected by life, but that something in you, something deep, dormant, essential, needed to be summoned, not by chance, not out of cruelty, but because there is a kind of transformation that only happens in silence, a rebirth that requires first and foremost that you be separated from the noise, that the voices of the world cease, that the roles you play fall away, and that finally, without an audience, without masks, without distractions, you come face to face with yourself. This is not comfort. It is not relief. It is a kind of symbolic death, but it is also the only path to certain forms of life. Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human psyche, did not see loneliness as a symptom of social failure. He saw it as a portal, as a sacred threshold between who you pretended to be and who you really are. And he knew something that most people never discover. There are moments in life when isolation is not optional. It is necessary. Because what needs to be born in you no longer fits into the world as it is. It doesn't fit into superficial conversations. It doesn't fit into the roles you've always played. It doesn't fit into the version of yourself that was built to please, to fit in, to not cause trouble. So life does something radical. It separates you. And in that separation, everything that is false begins to crumble. The masks become too heavy to sustain. The performances lose their audience. And you are finally forced to confront the question you have always avoided. Who am I when no one is looking? Who am I when I don't have to be anyone but myself? This question is not kind. It is disturbing. It deconstructs, but it also liberates. Because the answer, the real answer, can only be found where you are now. In silence. In solitude. In the emptiness that feels like punishment, but is actually the most fertile space you have ever inhabited. Then the question changes. It is no longer, why is this happening to me? But rather, what in me is trying to be born that only silence can reveal? The first thing you need to understand is that the pain of loneliness is real. It is not dramatic. It is not invented. It is not emotional fussiness or a lack of gratitude for life. It is a visceral, even physical pain, like a weight on your chest that won't go away, a silence that screams louder than any noise, a feeling of being invisible even when you are in the middle of a crowd. You wake up and realize that your phone hasn't vibrated. No one has reached out to you. No one has missed you. And that realization, as subtle as it may seem, builds up day after day until it becomes an internal narrative that is difficult to silence. I don't matter. I don't belong. Something is wrong with me. So you start comparing yourself. You see people around you building families, celebrating achievements, posting moments of connection. And you're alone, trying to understand when life decided you didn't deserve the same. The why me becomes an existential question, not a rhetorical one. You really want to know, why of all people were you the one left out, the one life forgot to invite? And that question eats away at you. It seeps into every thought, every moment of silence. It turns loneliness into evidence of personal failure, as if you had failed a test you didn't even know you were taking. And here lies the first big mistake, because loneliness, when felt this way, as punishment, as exclusion, as evidence that you are not enough, becomes a prison. You lock yourself in pain. You begin to identify with it. I am the one who is alone. I am the one no one chooses. And the more you repeat this story to yourself, the more it becomes consolidated as truth. You start acting like someone who has been abandoned, moving through the world with the certainty that you don't deserve connection. And ironically, this belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You close yourself off. You protect yourself. And without realizing it, you build even higher walls around yourself. But look, this interpretation is an illusion. A dangerous illusion, yes, but still an illusion. Because loneliness, in its deepest essence, is not about being rejected. It's about being separated. And there is a huge difference between these two things. When you are rejected, you are discarded. When you are separated, you are prepared. Rejection is an end. Separation is a beginning. And understanding this difference changes everything. Think of the great moments of transformation in human history. Buddha did not achieve enlightenment in the middle of a party. He sat alone under a tree in absolute silence until something inside him broke and was reborn. Jesus did not find clarity about his purpose surrounded by crowds. He went into the desert, 40 days, alone, confronting inner demons, hunger, doubt, the temptation to give up. And Jung? Jung himself, who dedicated his life to understanding the human psyche, went through a period of intense psychological isolation that he called confrontation with the unconscious. He documented everything in the famous Red Book, a deep, disturbing dive into his own shadow. These were years of creative and terrifying loneliness, years in which he needed to be away from the world in order to see what was inside him. These were not moments of defeat. They were rites of passage, initiations, moments when the noise of the world had to cease so that something greater could emerge. Because there is a kind of wisdom that cannot be learned from books, conversations, or courses. It can only be found in direct confrontation with oneself. And this confrontation requires silence. It requires isolation. It requires you to be forced to look inward, because there is nothing else out there to distract you. You may think, but those people were special. They were enlightened. I'm just me. And that's exactly the point. You don't have to be Buddha, Jesus, or Jung to be chosen by solitude. What you need is to be going through a transformation that the world around you cannot keep up with. Something in you is dying. The old version of you, the one that ran on autopilot, the one that pretended to be fine, the one that fit into other people's expectations. That version is falling apart, and something new is trying to be born. Something more real, more authentic, more you. But this birth is not gentle. It is violent. It hurts, because for something new to be born, something old must die. And the noise of the world, the opinions, the expectations, the roles you play, the masks you wear, all of that gets in the way. All of that prevents you from hearing the call of what is trying to emerge. So life, in a way that may seem cruel but is deeply wise, pushes you away. Not because you don't deserve connection, but because at this moment you need something that superficial connection cannot give you. You need yourself. Jung used a word to describe this process: individuation. It is not a complicated concept despite sounding academic. Individuation is simply the act of becoming who you really are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society expects, not the edited, performative, acceptable version of yourself, but the whole, raw, contradictory, authentic human being that exists beneath all the layers of conditioning. It is the process of unearthing the true self that has been buried alive under years of should be this way and need to act that way. And this process, it doesn't happen in a group. It doesn't happen in noise, it happens in solitude. Because only in silence can you hear the voice that has been muffled your whole life, your own. Only when the other voices cease, those of your parents, society, friends, the media, everyone who has always told you who you should be, only then can you hear the whisper of who you really are. But here's the problem. Most people can't handle it. They reach that point, isolated, alone, not knowing what to do with so much silence, and they run away. They run back to anything that brings noise. Empty relationships just so they won't be alone. Endless distractions. Social media where they can pretend they're connected. Compulsive work. Anything that avoids confrontation. Because being alone with yourself is perhaps the scariest thing a human being can do. It's looking in the mirror without a filter. It's listening to the thoughts you've always avoided. It's feeling the emotions you've buried. It's confronting the truths you've spent your life denying. And most people would rather do anything, even endure the pain of misinterpreted loneliness, than face that. They would rather suffer believing they have been abandoned than face the possibility that they have in fact been called to something greater, to a profound transformation, to a rebirth that can only happen in the dark, in the silence, in the emptiness. But what about you? If you are here reading this, feeling this, it is because some part of you knows. You know that you can no longer run away, that something greater is at stake, that this loneliness, as painful as it may be, carries a code, a hidden meaning, and that perhaps, just perhaps, you were chosen precisely because you have the courage to decipher that code, because you have the strength to stay when every instinct tells you to run. And that's when everything changes. When the distractions end, and they will end, you discover something disturbing. Your mind is much noisier than you imagined. In the external silence, the internal chaos explodes. Thoughts you've spent years avoiding begin to rise to the surface like bubbles from a dark lake. Regrets, hurts, fears you pretended you didn't have. Parts of yourself you rejected because they didn't fit the image you were trying to uphold. And suddenly you realize, loneliness is not empty. It is full of you, of everything you ignored, repressed, buried. And now, with no one to distract you, nothing to save you from yourself, all of it demands attention. It's as if you've spent your life running from something and finally in solitude you stop. And what you were running from catches up with you, not literally, but psychologically. All the emotions you didn't process, all the pain you swallowed to move on, all the truths about yourself that you didn't want to face, they're there, waiting. And in the silence, they become deafening. This is when most people give up, because it's too uncomfortable. It's like opening a closet you locked years ago and finding it full of things that have rotted away. The temptation is to close the door again. Pretend you didn't see it. Run back to the outside world and beg for someone, anyone, to distract you again. Turn on the TV. Scroll endlessly through your feed. Call that person you know isn't good for you, but at least fills the void. Anything to avoid having to stay there, in that oppressive silence, face to face with everything you've avoided your whole life. But those who remain, those who take a deep breath and decide to look inside the closet, begin to understand something Jung called shadow work. And this is where the transformation really begins. The shadow in Jungian vocabulary is not something mystical or esoteric. It is not an external demon. It is simply everything in you that you have decided to deny. It is the personality traits you have repressed because they were not acceptable. The anger you never allowed yourself to feel because good people don't feel anger. The sadness you disguised as being fine because no one likes sad people. The envy you called something else because admitting envy is shameful. The selfishness you killed to be seen as a good person. The ambition you hid so as not to appear arrogant. The vulnerability you locked away so as not to appear weak. All of this doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. The shadow doesn't go away. It waits. And in solitude, when there are no more distractions, when there are no more masks to wear, when there are no more roles to play, the shadow emerges. It comes to the surface. And you have two choices. Keep running away or finally look at it. Really look. Without judgment, without fear, just with raw honesty. And when you do that, when you stop fighting the parts of yourself you've rejected, something extraordinary happens. You begin to regain energy. Because let's face it, repressing parts of yourself is exhausting. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. You can do it, but it takes constant effort. And the longer you hold it, the more tired you get. Until eventually you can't take it anymore and the ball explodes to the surface in a chaotic, uncontrolled way. But when you let go of the ball, when you allow those parts to exist, to be seen, to be integrated, you can finally rest. You can finally be whole. Jung believed that most human suffering comes from this internal fragmentation. We divide ourselves. We reject parts of ourselves. We create a persona, a social mask that we show to the world. And we bury everything that doesn't fit that persona in the shadow. But the shadow doesn't stay quiet. It leaks out. It manifests itself in behaviors you don't understand, in disproportionate reactions, in self-sabotage, in repetitive patterns that you swear you'll change but never do, because you're fighting against a part of yourself. And in that fight, there are no winners. Loneliness forces this confrontation. It brings you face to face with everything you've denied, and it's terrifying. You may discover that you're angrier than you admitted, sadder, more scared, more selfish, more needy, more fragile, and each of these discoveries hurts, because you've spent so much time building an image of who you are. An acceptable, controlled, secure image, that finding evidence to the contrary feels like a betrayal of yourself. But here's the twist. These traits you fear so much are not your enemies. They are messengers. The repressed anger is telling you that something was unfair and you never defended your boundaries. The buried sadness is showing you losses you never processed. The fear you ignore is signaling that you are living in a way that is not authentic. Every denied emotion, every rejected part of yourself, carries vital information about who you really are and what you really need. And when you stop fighting them, when you sit with those parts and ask, what are you trying to tell me? Something profound shifts. You begin to truly know yourself, not the edited version you present to the world, but the complete, contradictory, imperfect but real human being who has always been there. This process does not happen all at once. It is not a sudden revelation. It is a slow, gradual, sometimes painful unfolding. It's like peeling layers of an onion. Each layer that comes off reveals another underneath, and some of those layers make you cry, but you keep going, because for the first time in your life, you are getting closer to the core, to what is essentially you, before all the layers of conditioning, expectation, performance. And that's where loneliness reveals its true purpose. It didn't isolate you to punish you. It isolated you to reveal you, to give you the space and silence necessary for this work of excavation. Because you can't do it in the noise. You can't unearth your true self while you're busy being the version others expect. You need space, time, solitude. But beware, this is not a passive process. You don't just sit and wait for the revelation to come. You need to actively participate. You need to ask the hard questions. Why do I always do this? Where does this pattern come from? What am I avoiding feeling? What truth about myself don't I want to admit? And most importantly, you need to have the courage to hear the answers, because the answers are not always comfortable. Sometimes they destroy the story you've been telling yourself for years. Sometimes they reveal that the life you're living isn't really yours. And when that revelation comes, when you realize that you've been living according to someone else's script, that you've been chasing dreams that aren't yours, that you've been maintaining relationships out of fear and not love, that you've been suppressing essential parts of who you are just to fit in, it's devastating. Because you realize how much time you've wasted, how many years you've spent being someone you're not. But at the same time, it's liberating, because now you know. And knowing you can choose differently, you can start rebuilding, not the life that was imposed on you, but the life you really want to live. And that's what loneliness offers if you have the courage to stay in it. It gives you the chance to dismantle everything that is false and start over, from the bottom, from scratch. But this time, with truth. There is a stage in this process that few talk about, but that everyone who goes through deep loneliness knows. The fire. It is not an empty metaphor. It is lived experience. It is the moment when everything you have built, the image of yourself, the certainties you carried, the dreams you pursued, begins to burn. And you cannot put out the fire. All you can do is watch and let it do its job. This is the most difficult stage to endure, because up to this point, you may have accepted intellectually that loneliness has a purpose. You may even have begun to look at your shadow, to recognize the parts of yourself that you denied. But now you feel in your flesh what it means to be deconstructed. It's not just insight, it's pain. It's the feeling that everything you thought you knew about yourself is crumbling. And in that collapse, you become vulnerable, exposed, defenseless. Jung understood this deeply. He used the image of alchemy to describe the process of psychological transformation. Ancient alchemists believed that to turn lead into gold, you first had to dissolve the metal in fire, reduce everything to raw material. Only then, through careful processes, could something new and precious emerge. And the same is true for you. Loneliness is the cauldron. Fire is the confrontation with everything that is false in your life. And dissolution? Dissolution is that feeling that you are falling apart. You begin to question everything. The choices you made, the relationships you maintained, the career you pursued, the beliefs you inherited. And with each question, something breaks. Maybe you realize that the job you dedicated yourself to was never really your desire. It was what was expected of you. Or that the relationship you tried to save had been dead for years and you just didn't want to admit it. Or that the person you tried to be, the one who is strong, who has everything under control, who never breaks down, was never real. It was just a performance. Armor you wore for so long that you forgot you had a body underneath it. And now that armor is melting away. And without it, you don't know who you are. That's the scary part. Because for a moment, in sometimes a long, painful moment, you're in limbo. You're no longer who you were. But you haven't yet become who you're going to be. You're in the middle, in the void, in the space between death and rebirth. And that space, it has no floor, no map, no guarantees. You're suspended between two versions of yourself, and both seem equally unreal. Think of winter. Everything seems dead. The trees are bare. The earth is hard. There are no flowers. There is no fruit. And if you didn't know that spring exists, you could swear that everything is over, that nothing else will grow. But beneath the surface, something is happening. The roots are deepening. The sap is descending to the center. The plant is focusing its energy not on appearing, but on sustaining itself, on strengthening itself, on preparing the ground for the next cycle of growth. Winter is not death, it is gestation. Your loneliness is that winter, and you are going through this invisible underground process. Nothing seems to be happening on the outside. Your life may seem stagnant, empty, motionless, but on the inside, massive transformations are underway. You are descending to the roots. You are accessing layers of yourself that were dormant. You are reconnecting with desires, dreams, truths that were buried alive under years of conditioning. And this process cannot be rushed. Just as you cannot force a seed to germinate faster, you cannot accelerate your own transformation. But this process requires your cooperation. It requires that you don't fight the fire. Because if you resist, if you try to cling to what is burning, the old identity, the old patterns, the old stories, you will only prolong the agony. The fire will continue, but instead of purifying, it will torture, because you are preventing it from completing its work. You are trying to save exactly what needs to die. True transformation requires surrender, and surrender is not giving up. It is not passivity. It is the courage to let go of control, to trust that something is happening, even when you don't understand it. It is the willingness to sit with discomfort without trying to resolve it immediately, to allow the old to die, even without knowing exactly what will come next. It is saying yes to the process, even when every cell in your body wants to scream no. Nietzsche understood this. He spoke of amor fati, love of fate, the ability to embrace everything that happens, including pain, including destruction, as a necessary part of the journey. He knew that only those who go through fire, only those who accept being broken, have the chance to be rebuilt in a truer, stronger, freer way. And he himself lived this. His years of isolation, illness, and suffering were not wasted. They were the crucible where his philosophy was forged. And this is where the difference lies between those who emerge transformed and those who remain trapped in suffering. It is not the absence of pain. Everyone who goes through deep loneliness feels pain. The difference is the relationship with pain. Some see it as an enemy, as proof that something is wrong, and they spend all their time fighting, denying, trying to escape. But others, and these are rare, can see pain as a guide, as a teacher, as the tool that life is using to sculpt them. You don't have to like pain, you don't have to romanticize it, you don't have to pretend it's pleasant or welcome, but you do have to respect it, because it's showing you where you're still attached to illusions, where you are still stuck in false identities, where you are still living according to someone else's script. And every time something burns, every time something hurts, it is because it is being revealed, brought to light, so that you can finally choose whether you want to continue carrying it or if you are ready to let go. That is the secret of alchemy. Gold is not created out of nothing. It was already there, hidden in the lead. Fire does not invent gold. It only reveals what has always been present. And the same is true for you. The person you are becoming is not someone new. It is who you have always been, underneath all the layers, underneath the fear, underneath the performance, underneath the expectations, underneath the you should and you need to that have been piled on you since childhood. The fire is just burning away everything that is not essential, everything that is not you. And when the fire finally begins to subside, when the flames turn to embers, you will realize something extraordinary. You are still standing. Hurt, yes. Exhausted, certainly. But whole. More whole than ever. Because now you are no longer a collage of fragmented pieces trying to pass for a person. You are no longer a set of masks piled on top of each other. You are one. Integrated. Real. And for the first time in your life, you know who you are when all the layers are removed. And that wholeness, it changes everything. Because now you have a foundation, you have roots, you have a core, and no one can take that away from you. There is a specific moment in this journey when something changes. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's subtle, but you feel it. It's as if after months, maybe years of internal struggle, questioning, pain, something finally settles. You wake up one day and the weight on your chest is a little lighter. The silence no longer screams, and for the first time in a long time, you don't feel like running away from yourself. You can just be. No rush, no panic, no urgent need to fill every second with distraction. This is the moment of clarity, not intellectual clarity, where you understand things with your mind, but visceral clarity, where you feel the truth in your body. You no longer need to convince yourself that everything is fine, because it finally is. Not because your external life has changed, not because someone came along to save you, but because something inside has reorganized itself. As if all the disconnected pieces within you have finally found their places. And in this reorganization, things that once seemed impossible to see become obvious. You look back and realize how many relationships you sustained out of fear of being alone. How many times you said yes when you wanted to say no. How many versions of yourself you created just to be accepted. How many parts of yourself you suppressed because they didn't fit the image others expected. And now, having gone through the fire, having faced loneliness, you no longer need to do that. Because you've discovered something that no one can teach you. You've discovered that you can be okay with yourself. And that discovery is revolutionary, because most human suffering comes from the fear of being abandoned, from the fear of being alone. That's why we accept crumbs. That's why we mold ourselves. That's why we betray our own desires. That's why we swallow words that should have been spoken. That's why we stay in places that suffocate us. Because deep down, we believe that if we are truly ourselves, If we reveal who we really are, we will be rejected. And rejection seems worse than death. But after going through loneliness, after being truly alone and surviving, that fear loses its power. You've already faced the worst case scenario, you've already been isolated, you've already felt abandonment, and yet you're still here, still standing, still breathing, still able to feel, to think, to create, to dream. And that realization changes the game completely, because now you know, you can lose everything except yourself. And as long as you have yourself, you have enough. Now you begin to rediscover parts of yourself that have been forgotten. That thing you loved to do as a child before someone told you it was a waste of time. That dream you buried because it wasn't practical or realistic. That way of seeing the world that you suppressed because it didn't fit expectations. That curiosity that was ridiculed. That sensitivity that was called weakness. All of this begins to resurface, not in a forced way, but naturally, as if these parts of you had been waiting patiently for this moment, waiting for you to have enough space and silence to hear them again. And you start asking different questions. No longer, what do others expect of me? But what do I really want? Not how do I fit in, but how do I live authentically? Not what is safe, but what is true. And these questions, when asked honestly, when asked after all the inner work you've already done, begin to reveal surprising answers. Answers you always knew, but never had the courage to admit. Maybe you realize that what really matters to you isn't what you've always been told should matter. Maybe you discover that you're more creative than rational, more introspective than social, more spiritual than materialistic, or the opposite. The point isn't what you discover. The point is that you discover it, not because someone told you, not because you read it somewhere, but because you dug deep enough to find your own truth. And that truth, however inconvenient, is yours, and it matters more than any external approval. And with that truth comes something precious, self-compassion, because now you understand. You understand why you made the choices you made, why you lost your way, why you hurt yourself, why you accepted less than you deserved, why you stayed in places that slowly destroyed you. It wasn't because you were weak or flawed. It was because you were operating with the wrong map, a map that wasn't yours, a map that was drawn by other people, for other people, based on values that weren't yours. And now, having found your own map, you can forgive yourself. You can look at your story with kindness instead of judgment. And that forgiveness of yourself, but also of others, is transformative. Because as long as you carry resentment, anger, hurt, you are stuck. Stuck in the past, stuck in the pain, stuck in the narrative of victimhood. But when you forgive, when you finally understand that everyone, including you, was doing the best they could with what they had, you free yourself. Not because what happened is right, not because you need to forget or pretend it didn't hurt, but because you no longer need to carry the weight of it. You can finally let go. And this is where something interesting happens. You start dreaming again. Not the conditioned dreams of youth, not escapist fantasies, but real possibilities. A life that reflects who you've become. And these dreams don't seem impossible. They seem necessary, as if the only impossible thing were not to pursue them. As if not living according to who you really are were a greater betrayal than any external failure. But to live those dreams, to build that authentic life, you need more than clarity. You need structure. You need tools. You need a path that helps you integrate everything you've discovered about yourself and translate that into concrete actions in the world. Because transformation that remains only internal, that doesn't manifest externally, eventually gets lost. You need to embody this new version of yourself. And that requires method. It requires consistency. It requires a system that keeps you anchored while you rebuild your life from scratch. That's why I created the codes of the White Rabbit. Because after years of studying the patterns of the human mind, the mechanisms of suffering, the paths of transformation, I realized that a bridge was missing. Something was missing that would connect insight with action, self-knowledge with practical life, philosophy with everyday life. And this program is that bridge. It guides you step by step through the process of consciously rebuilding your life, not with empty promises or magic formulas, but with the philosophical and psychological rigor necessary for real and lasting change. If you feel you have reached this point in your journey, where you have already done the inner work, faced your shadow, gone through the fire, and are now ready to build, this program is for you. You will find the link in the description of this video. And if it's not the right time yet, that's okay. Respect your timing. But know that when you are ready, the path is available. Because what comes next is no longer about destruction. It's about creation. It's about taking everything you've learned in solitude and using it to shape a life that is genuinely yours. And that's where true freedom begins. But there is a truth that has not yet been told. a truth that few have the courage to admit even after going through all this. And it is this: loneliness was never really about others. It was never about who abandoned you, who walked away, who didn't choose you. Loneliness was always about you, about the relationship you have with yourself. And that is the most difficult revelation of all, because it's much easier to blame the world. It's comforting in a way to believe that you're alone because people didn't understand you, because the universe was unfair, because you were born into the wrong family, at the wrong time, in the wrong place. This narrative makes you the victim, yes, but it also absolves you of responsibility. And there's a strange relief in that. If it's the world's fault, you don't have to change anything about yourself. But the truth is harder, and at the same time more liberating. The truth is that often you were alone long before anyone abandoned you. You were alone because you abandoned yourself first. You betrayed yourself. You ignored yourself. You silenced yourself. You molded yourself. You broke yourself into pieces small enough to fit into other people's expectations. And every time you did that, you distanced yourself a little more from yourself. Until one day, you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize who was looking back at you. And that is the deepest loneliness. Not the absence of others, but the absence of yourself. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone, because you are not present. You are there physically, but your true self, that is locked away somewhere, screaming to be heard, but you can't hear it because there is too much noise, too much performance, too much fear. Jung had a phrase that cuts to the bone. Loneliness does not come from not having people around. It comes from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. And that's devastating. Because it means you can have friends, family, partners, and still be deeply isolated. Because the person you show them isn't real. It's an edited version. Safe, acceptable. And the real you, that one remains alone, invisible, unrecognized. And how long can you live like this? How long can you keep up the charade before you start to break down inside? Before you feel like you're suffocating in your own life? Before you realize that you've built an entire existence around a person who doesn't exist? That's why loneliness found you. Not to punish you, but to rescue you. To force you to confront this betrayal of yourself. To give you the chance to finally stop. To silence the world. To sit down with who you really are and ask, where did I leave you? When did I abandon you? And when you ask that question honestly, the answers start to come. Maybe it was when you chose the course your parents wanted instead of the one that made your heart beat faster. Maybe it was when you stayed in the safe relationship instead of taking a chance on true love. Maybe it was when you started laughing at jokes that hurt you just to fit in. Or when you stopped expressing your opinions because it was better not to cause conflict. Or when you hid your tears because strong people don't cry. Or when you killed your dreams because dreams don't pay the bills. Each of these choices seemed small at the time. They seemed reasonable, practical, mature, but each one was a step away from yourself. And now, looking back, you see the whole path. You see how far you've come from who you were, how completely you lost yourself. And that realization can be overwhelming because it brings guilt, it brings shame. How did I let this happen? How did I betray myself for so long? But here's what you need to understand. You didn't know. You were doing the best you could with what you had. You were trying to survive, trying to be loved, trying to belong. And in the process, you learned that belonging meant not being yourself. It meant adapting, molding yourself, hiding. But now you know differently. Now, having walked through the fire, you understand that the only belonging that matters is belonging to yourself. That the only approval that sustains you is your own. That the only validation that heals is internal. And with that understanding comes forgiveness. Not a superficial forgiveness, not an it's okay, but a deep forgiveness rooted in true compassion for who you were. For all the versions of yourself that desperately tried to navigate a confusing world. For all the choices that seemed right at the time, even if they led you away from yourself. You can finally look at your story and say, I understand. I understand why you did what you did. I understand the fear. I understand the pain. And I don't blame you anymore. And in that forgiveness, something breaks. The chains that bound you to the past dissolve. And for the first time, you are free. Not free from circumstances, but free internally. Free from guilt. Free from judgment. Free from the war against yourself. And it is here, at this exact point, that true reconnection begins. Because now you can call back the parts of yourself that were exiled. You can reintegrate what was rejected. You can embrace what was denied. And little by little, piece by piece, you become whole again. Not the way you were before, but in a new way. More conscious, stronger, more real. And this regained wholeness, it is the true opposite of loneliness. Because when you are whole, when you reconnect with yourself, you are never truly alone again. You carry permanent company, your own. And then you arrive here, at the end of the journey. But it's not really an end. It's a beginning. Because everything you've been through, the pain, the fire, the confrontation, the dissolution, the rebirth, all of it has prepared you for this moment. The moment when you are finally ready to live. Not survive, not perform, but truly live. And living, you now know, is something completely different from what you were taught. It's not about accumulating achievements. It's not about impressing people. It's not about following the approved script. Living is about honesty. It's about authenticity. It's about waking up every day and choosing to be true to who you really are, even when it's easier to pretend, even when it's more comfortable to hide. And yes, that's scary, because living authentically means taking risks. It means that some people won't understand, some will judge, some will walk away. But here's the secret you learned in the silence. It doesn't matter anymore, because the approval of those people would cost you the one thing you're no longer willing to sacrifice: yourself. You paid a high price to get here. You crossed the desert of loneliness. You faced your shadow. You burned in the fire of transformation. And now, having paid that price, you won't waste what you've gained. You won't betray yourself again. You won't mold yourself again. You won't live someone else's life again. And perhaps for the first time, you understand what it means to have existential autonomy. It is not arrogance. It is not isolation. It is simply the ability to sustain yourself internally, to have your own answers, to trust your own judgment, to know that no matter what happens outside, you have a solid center within yourself, a home to which you can always return. And from that center, that inner solidity, you can finally relate to the world in a healthy way. You can give without emptying yourself. You can receive without losing yourself. You can love without dissolving. You can be vulnerable without destroying yourself. Because now you know the difference between openness and abandonment of self, between generosity and self-sacrifice, between love and dependence. And the people who come into your life now, they are different. Because you are different. You no longer attract those who feed off your neediness. You attract those who resonate with your wholeness. And these connections, although they may be rarer, are infinitely more real. They are based on mutual choice, not need, on respect, not control, on freedom, not fear. But the most beautiful thing is that you no longer need anyone else to validate your existence. You can enjoy the company. You can enjoy the connections. You can love deeply. But you don't need anyone else to feel complete, because you are already complete. And that completeness is the greatest gift that loneliness has given you. So what do you do now? How do you translate all of this into life? How do you turn awareness into action? Start simple. Start with honesty. In every small choice you make each day, ask yourself, is this true for me? Or am I doing it because I think I should? And when the answer is should, pause, question it, and if possible, choose differently. Choose what is true, even if it is uncomfortable. Practice inner listening. Set aside moments of silence, not accidental silence, but deliberate silence, where you simply sit with yourself. No distractions, no agenda. And listen. What is your body saying? What are your emotions signaling? What is your intuition whispering? These voices have been muffled for too long. Give them space to speak. Set sacred boundaries. Protect your time, protect your energy, protect your peace. Not because you are selfish, but because you now understand that taking care of yourself is not a luxury. It is a responsibility. You cannot give what you do not have. And if you empty yourself completely, there will be nothing left. Not for you, not for anyone. And finally, forgive your pace. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to never stumble again. This journey back to yourself has no end. It is continuous. There will always be new layers to discover, new shadows to integrate, new fears to face. And that's okay, because now you know how to do it. You already have the tools. You've already gone through the hardest part. Loneliness brought you here. It broke you. It rebuilt you. It revealed you. And now it sets you free. Not because you are free from it forever, but because you now understand that it was never your enemy. It was just the way back home, to yourself. And now, standing in this place of deep reconnection with yourself, you carry something rare. A wisdom that does not come from books. It comes from having gone through the fire, from having faced the void, from having survived the death of the false self and the birth of the true self. And that wisdom, no one can take it away from you. It is yours, forever. So breathe, look around, and realize you are free. Free from external approval, free from the fear of being yourself, free from the invisible chains that bound you to a life that was not yours. You can finally live, and this time for real. And now I ask you, looking back on your own journey, What was the exact moment when you realized you were abandoning yourself for someone else, for an expectation, or for fear of being alone? Leave it here in the comments, because recognizing that moment is the first step to rescuing yourself. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos, you reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the codes of the White Rabbit are ready for you. The link is in the video description. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.